fear persecution and discrimination against Muslims. That's the situation in the United States, according to Amnesty International. But is it true? Is it motivated by politics, or is it just exaggerated and blown out of proportion by the world's media? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Nick Clark. Welcome to the programme. Anti-Islam sentiment is on the rise in the United States, so says Amnesty International. The human rights group has pointed to rising crimes committed against Muslims in the country, including the stabbing of a cab driver in New York and attacks on mosque sites around the country. The statement also highlights the International Burn a Quran Day, which was sponsored by a Florida church. While that plan was postponed by organisers, it did create plenty of hype, with many US officials, including President Barack Obama, who rebuked it. All this as the US marked the 9th anniversary of the September the 11th attacks. Generally a sombre and solemn event, this year was slightly different. Yes, there were demonstrations at the World Trade Center site, also known as Ground Zero, over a proposed nearby Islamic cultural centre and mosque. Opponents of the project say it's an offensive move, while supporters say it is racist and against the US Constitution not to allow it. Well, to take this on, joining us now are our guests in Los Angeles. We have Salam al-Marayati. He's the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and in Beirut, Alistair Crook, who is the director of the Conflicts Forum, works for engagement between political Islam and the West. Gentlemen, both of you, welcome to the programme. Salam al-Marayati, if I could start with you. Is it your view that there is a rising tide of Islamophobia in the United States? Does what we've heard from Amnesty accurately portray the state of affairs, do you think?
Well, I think we've definitely detected a virus in the body of hate in our country, unfortunately, and now we see it spreading. The question is, how bad is it going to manifest itself? We've seen the stunts of Quran burning, we've seen discrimination, and the individual who was stabbed in New York. It could actually get much worse before it gets better. But
wouldn't you say that the recent cases of the attacks that you quote there, the Quran burning issue, the Ground Zero issue, and so on and so forth, those sort of sentiments overshadow on the whole that Muslims in the United States actually enjoy a pretty good life?
I think that's correct. I think in general, even with these anti-Muslim sentiments and expressions and publicity stunts, what we've seen actually on the ground is an outpour of support from our civic partners, from political leaders, the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, so many public officials who have come out in support of the Muslim community in America. And in general, as you stated, our life is pretty good here. People are still living a good life. We're free. We are free to assembly. We're free to express ourselves. But really, we're talking about the political arena. And in the political arena, I think that Muslims still live in a virtual internment camp. We can't get out of this paradigm of being interned because of what happened on 9/11, and actually what's been happening for so many years in terms of Western policies towards the Muslim world.
Okay, Alistair Crook in Beirut, do you believe that this is just a political issue in that sense, or is it the start of something more threatening, a more dangerous trend, if you like?
Oh, I think it's much more profound. I think your last speaker is right to say it's likely to get worse. And of course, we're talking here not so much about statistics of attack, but really about atmospherics. And that's clearly changing, partly because the politicians are using, if you like, Islam as a political tool. But I think the deeper thing, the deeper issues that we are facing is, in a sense, the West is in some form of really metaphysical crisis. It's feeling that, if you like, it's not just in an economic and a financial crisis. The totems of its belief in markets are being challenged, but it's also feeling the same way that the vision of the future, the vision of the West, is no longer that of the majority of the people. People are feeling vulnerable and feeling very threatened by this. And as they feel threatened by that, they look for people who they can explain to be the cause of it, whether it's immigrants or whether it's the Hispanic community or whether it's Muslims. But mainly it will be Muslims because they're seen to be threatening.
Okay, well, as you say, as you both have alluded to, sentiments towards Muslims has been creeping into the US political agenda. For instance, President Obama, endorsed the Ground Zero Mosque, saying Muslims have the same right to freedom of religion as everyone else in America. But 2012 hopefuls like Newt Gingrich and Sarah Palin, they've staunchly opposed the project, saying it's offensive, questioning the legitimacy of Obama's decision. And with midterm elections around the corner and the next presidential elections within 2 years' time, this issue is expected to be used by politicians, I guess, trying to mobilize people and garner support. And just to sort of illustrate that, let's look at what Gingrich had to say about this issue. Soon after Pastor Terry Jones announced that he was shelving his plans to burn copies of the Quran, Gingrich drew a parallel between that and the plans to build a Ground Zero mosque. This is what he had to say. He said, "I'm glad to see that the pastor took a big step back. I wish that Imran Rauf, who was the man involved with the mosque, would have the same courage and commitment to America and take an equally big step back from the Ground Zero mosque." So, Alistair Crook, to what degree, on the whole, do you think politics does play a role in all of this, and in the sense of how politicians respond to the public mood, and how dangerous is that?
Well, I think we're seeing both in Europe and America the same trend. We're seeing the rise of quite very much right-wing parties. We're seeing the rise of people who are using Islam for political purposes. As I was indicating earlier, the problems facing the West, not only the economic problems, but the social problems, the sense that no longer the Western vision is held in such esteem by the world at large and has the leadership of the world. These are not things to which politicians have an easy answer, to have a quick soundbite answer. So it's much easier, if you like, to find enemies elsewhere, find enemies at home, and to use those as a means of bringing political support to your side, rather than dealing with the deeper issues for which perhaps these parties really don't have any easy solutions. So I think it's quite clear that the quickest way for popularity, certainly that's the case in Europe at the moment, is by accusing the Islamic community, accusing immigrants of being the cause of some of the economic problems they're facing. But it also has a special resonance in the United States because, in a sense, the United States has been engaged in a number of wars in Muslim societies. And the United States, with all its military power, with all its political strength, is not winning those. And people feel very bewildered by the fact that a powerful country like the United States is not prevailing as they imagined they thought they would against Islamic movements, against these societies. And again, it's easy, therefore, to generate a sense of anxiety and a sense of people being overwhelmed and feeling fear about the future, using this as a political context.
Okay, Mr. al-Marayati, I'm going to come to you in just a second. I just want to have a quick listen to this. President Obama, Barack Obama, who's been pretty plain in how he views the current position. Just have a listen.
As Americans, we are not and never will be at war with Islam. It was not a religion that attacked us that September day. It was Al-Qaeda, the sorry band of men which perverts religion. And just as we condemn intolerance and extremism abroad, so will we stay true to our traditions here at home as a diverse and tolerant nation.
So, Mr. al-Marayati, do you think President Obama has to be very careful on how he couches what he thinks and what he truly believes, and how he actually delivers that to the public, given what the current mood is in the United States?
Well, he is very careful, but at the same time, he has to be bold in terms of how he's defining America, because as the previous speaker said, I think right now America is at a crossroads. We are really, as a country, trying to define who we are. We're in struggle for what our conscience is defining us to be. Is America going to be an exclusive club where the Newt Gingriches and the Sarah Palin say that they're America and the rest of us are just visitors? Or is America going to be based on the values that the rest of the world has really complimented America about? The values of pluralism, of inclusion, and of equal rights. And so what the president is talking about is, if we want to stay true to the America of equality, to the America of pluralism, then the test case for America today is the inclusion of Islam and Muslims in terms of just the ability to build a house of worship where they please, as synagogues and churches are built in America. So this is a struggle for defining America's soul today, and I think, yes, the president has to be careful about how he explains that, but at the same time, I think he's making a very bold step in trying to define that for the rest of the American public. And obviously, the Muslims of America are the easy political punching bag, so there's going to be a lot of scapegoating between now and the November elections.
We're joined from Washington, D.C. by Richard Miniter, an author of bestsellers such as Losing Bin Laden and Shadow War. Mr. Miniter, we just heard Barack Obama there being pretty forthright, but in a sense he does have to be very careful how he puts forward his views, given the seemingly growing trend in support of the, I guess, Islamophobia.
Well, two things. One is he sounded a lot like President Bush, using almost the same language as President Bush. But secondly, I sort of disagree with this idea that there's a rising Islamophobia in the United States anyway. And there's substantial differences between the way Islam is perceived in the United States and Canada on the one hand, and in Western Europe on the other. I mean, Muslims are very accepted here in the United States. I mean, the average Muslim makes more than the average Christian. There's no limits to Muslim immigration to the United States. There are no laws that single out Muslims for special treatment one way or the other in the United States. And, you know, even in the area around Ground Zero, there are 3 mosques currently. One has been there since 1970 that are not controversial at all. So the idea that the Americans are somehow turned against Muslims is, I think, largely a creation of the media. I understand the media likes to find a good story and promote it to its audience. But, you know, Muslim immigration to the United States, if anything, has increased in the last 10 years. And the Muslims who come here are business owners, are software developers, engineers, and are quite successful and quite happy and seem to fit in with their neighbors very well. The real divide in America is not between Islam and everyone else. It's between the religious and the secular.
Okay, Mr. Mariotti?
Yeah, I agree that at the ground level, definitely Muslims are enjoying a great American life, but I think at the political level, in the political arena, there's still a lot of scapegoating against Muslims, and that is going to create a burden, especially on young Muslims already feeling alienated for all, by all these negative stories. What President Obama is doing, he's doing 2 things. One, he's defining what the war is about. It's not a war against Islam, it's a war against al-Qaeda, because al-Qaeda wants this to be a war between America and Islam. And the Islamophobes here agree with al-Qaeda. That's exactly what they want. They want a war between cultures, between religions. And secondly, I think what President Obama is doing is he's defining who we are as Americans. What is our pluralism all about? Is it going to be the America of the exclusive club that's defined by the Palins and the Newt Gingriches? Or is it going to be the America of our founding fathers in terms of pluralism? So if there's going to be a synagogue or a church that can be built on Park 51, then there can also be a mosque. And I think he's making that very clear to the American people that we are at a crossroads in terms of how we define our own pluralism on what made America great, and we need to continue making that greatness clear to the rest of the world, because this is how we're going to prosper.
Richard Miniter, how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I think there's no danger from Palin or anyone else that American pluralism is about to disappear. I mean, this is not Holland, where people are or France for that matter, where political parties are urging the expulsion of Muslims. No one is talking about that. The idea that there's some sort of political exclusion for Muslims would really be news to Congressman Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim who represents a district in Minnesota. And there are certainly other Muslims who are running for office this year at the state, local, and federal levels. And no one is saying that they shouldn't be able to stand for office and indeed to win and to hold office. When Keith Ellison was sworn in, up until that point in American history, every member of Congress had sworn on the Bible. He swore his oath of office on the Quran, and this was seen as an interesting thing, but not very controversial. So the idea that Muslims are being excluded in the United States is laughable and strange.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's throw some figures into the mix of the discussion, see how public opinion stands. A recent Washington Post ABC poll found that 49% of American respondents disapproved of Muslims' religion. That's the highest number recorded since the suicide strikes by Al-Qaeda in 2001. The lowest was 24% in 2002. So, Alistair Crook, can I put to you that Islamophobia has just remained dormant, if you like, just lurking under the surface until something was to bring it to the fore, such as events as we've seen most recently?
Well, I think we're confusing two things. I mean, first of all, there is a context, and it's fine to say in America there's no particular action that's taken against Muslims. But then your last speaker did refer to what's happening in Europe. And we see generally there is a tendency, because of, I say, and I mentioned earlier, the sort of sense of fear and anxiety that the Western states have, whether it's Europe or America or Canada. Maybe America has been slow to take on this language, if you like, this atmospherics more than policy actions. But certainly that is the sense that we are entering in a tide. And this tide is as much connected also not just to what happens in the Middle East, but it's also connected to the economic circumstances of both the United States and Europe. In both these cases, of course, it will be, if you like, the outsiders, the people who are not part of the tribe, the immigrants that will be, if you like, blamed or will be the scapegoats, not only for what's happening in the wars overseas, but the economic failures at home. So this is a much wider trend, and we can see that very clearly spreading in Europe and getting more serious and getting deeper. And of course, it's now in the United States, and it will be picked up at the political level. And of course, maybe the laws have not changed, but any Muslim visiting the United Kingdom or France or Germany knows that the atmosphere when he crosses the border, when he meets the immigration official, the surveillance, the checking, the police watching, all of this has changed dramatically in the recent years because of a change in public sentiment.
Okay, and what about how the media approaches this story has changed? I know we've alluded to it already. What role does the media have in this? I mean, we've seen this big media frenzy over the Terry Jones, the Florida pastor wanting to burn the Quran, but surely it's just a story that should have just been ignored by the world media, and you know, the guy's extreme, wouldn't you say, Mr. al-Marayati?
Absolutely, but the problem is the media are not going to ignore these publicity stunts. I mean, even people in his own congregation were condemning his actions to burn the Quran. But it made international news. It forced the president and the Secretary of State, and it forced the president and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to respond to this publicity stunt. So unfortunately, things start very small, but it turns into an international crisis, as we see now rioting in Afghanistan over this. So it is an issue. We're dealing with perceptions right now, and perceptions are realities.
And Richard Miniter, that is a problem, isn't it? Because if editors, you know, they're just trying to feed the beast, aren't they? They want to run stories that their readers and their viewers want, and it demonstrates that there is an appetite for Islamophobic stories, if you like.
Well, I don't know about that. First of all, I think the story, Terry Jones was desperately trying to peddle this story in early August, and the only people who were interested in picking it up were those in Arab media. In fact, the story grew throughout the month of August in Arab media. It was only picked up in English language media at the very end of August, and then picked up steam in the week before September 11th. So I would think that, if anything, American and English language media generally was responding to what was already growing into a very big story in Arab media, understandably. But getting back to the other point, I think there's a big difference between Europe and the United States in that who the Muslims are. I think the sentiment in Europe is largely anti-Arab. Most Muslims in Europe are Arab, while most Muslims in the United States come from Pakistan, India, Indonesia, Malaysia. It's very different. They tend not to be Arabs. 2/3 of Arabs in America are, in fact, Christian. So it's not an so I think most of the animus, the so-called Islamophobia, is actually anti-Arab, and there frankly aren't that many Arabs here that are Muslim. And secondly, I think also that because Europe is a fundamentally different political system, which enables very small parties to get political power. That's just not possible in a first-past-the-post system like ours in the United States, what Britain used to have, where you know, you have to have a very large cross-section of support in order to get political power. that means that the political voices tend to be more responsible than they are in, say, France, Belgium.
The problem is
there's
a lot of disinformation flying about, isn't there, in the States? You have 20% of Americans who think that President Obama is a Muslim. And, you know, that shouldn't be an issue anyway. It makes it sound as if it's a sinister agenda, which clearly it isn't.
Well, under Sharia,
exactly.
once you're a Muslim, you're always a Muslim.
Okay, Mr. al-Marayati, continue.
I don't know what, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I think that's part of the problem, is that people are in denial that now saying somebody's a Muslim is an actual slur in American politics. And even Keith Ellison, when he was elected to be member of Congress, it was a controversy. People were questioning his loyalty. I mean, Glenn Beck was talking about, you know, asking whether he's going to serve America or serve the enemies of America on national television. There is a crisis, and people have to stop being in denial over this political crisis, because it will lead to more hate crimes on the streets, unfortunately. There is a major burden on young Muslims in campuses now, not just being bullied, but enduring the slurs just because they are Muslim. And the longer we are in denial of this problem, then the longer it's going to take for us to figure out solutions.
Okay.
It is an issue
We're running out of time. I just want to bring in Alistair Crook.
Stands for pluralism or exclusion.
Okay, Alistair Crook, can Muslims themselves do more, do you think? Should they make more effort to promote themselves and their religion more than they are already doing in the United States?
No, I don't think that the attempt to try and make themselves, if you like, good citizens, or more, if you like Christians in the way in which they behave in those societies, be it Europe or America, is actually going to change it. When you have these feelings arise, these deep feelings, which have very deep roots, which have been repeated time and time again over the last 1,000 years from the Crusades. It was during the Crusades that Muslims were first described as a violent religion to explain their military prowess against the Crusaders. That was repeated several times during the century afterwards. So we are dealing with really deep sentiments, and I don't think that simply behaving nicely and being docile is necessarily going to change that. I don't think that being, if you like, forthright and aggressive is going to help either. I think it's a much deeper problem, and it's going to be affected also by the events in the Middle East as much as by the good or bad behavior of Muslims in Europe or in the United States.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately that's all we've got time for. As ever, we could always, I'm sorry we have run out of time, we could always continue this for many hours, but that's it for now. Many thanks to our guests, Richard Miniter in Washington, D.C., Salam al-Mariyati in Los Angeles, and Alistair Crook in Beirut. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. Be good to hear from you. Any thoughts or suggestions, just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.